the world today, the field of church ministry. In the first chapter last week, we spoke about the different experiences that people from all over the world have had about ministry or anything connected to the idea of ministry. And it was a kind of a sweeping overview of experiences of ministry in different parts of the world, but I only concentrated on regions or continental divisions. Of course, as we all know, for example, in talking about Asia, there's a great deal of variety as far as Asia is concerned. So variety of experiences in regard to ministry. And but we can only cover so much in a small time. So we don't want to. How come Sister Shirley is not able to admit? Cannot be admitted. Okay. Okay. All right. So what I would like to present today or this week is the context, the bigger context of ministry, both the what I would call ecclesial context, as well as the worldwide context of the society at large. Because I think it's important to know that when we do some ministry or when we undertake ministry in the church, especially in the church, we cannot fail to include a kind of a consideration on the situation that is obtaining in the church, within the church itself, as well as the situation that is there in society at large. Okay, we all know that we are not the whole world is not Christian or not Catholic, but there is a great deal of population in the world that is non-Catholic, but we do have something to do with them. In fact, if you look at the way we have been trying to address issues in the world, the church as a body has a particular ministry towards the world. Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution of the church, has already made this very clear, that the church is not just for itself, but also for the world. The message that the church has is also for the world. And that is why we need to examine a little bit the context of ministry today, as we find it today. So this is what I'm going to be discussing today, the field of church ministry, in other words, the world today, including, of course, the church. It's a kind of a review. Implicit in what we have taken up in chapter 1 are the main questions, or is the main question. How is ministry understood theologically? Not main questions, but main question. How is ministry understood theologically? What this actually means, you have some sub-questions. What kind of ministry is being done? Is it a ministry in the Eucharist, something to do with the sacraments? Is it ministry for the sick? Is it ministry for, let's say, those who are seeking instruction, let's say, in the faith? Or is it ministry that is more like ministry in terms of social justice, in terms of ecology? What kind of ministry is being done? And so we also ask, implicit in the discussion last week, who is or who are the minister or the ministers that we talk about? When we speak of minister, who are we talking about? Lay, women, priests, patriarchs, pope, church in general. So we need to identify them. Or among the lay people, do we speak about different levels of ministries among the laity? Okay. And then the third sub-question would be, who do they minister to? Who is the so-called object of their ministry? Who is it that they are ministering to? Are they people? Are they groups of people? Are they converts? Are they believers? Are they wayward Christians? Are they married couples? Are they so all the different people that are being attended? Are they within the church or are they outside of the church? And then, of course, the ever important sub question, why do they do this ministry? What is the purpose? What is behind the ministry? What is the motivation that drives them to undertake this ministry? Okay, so this means that a specific theology of ministry lies at the heart of whatever we do in terms of ministry. Okay, what ministry is being done, who is the minister, who do they minister to, and why do we do ministry? All of this implies a particular understanding of ministry. We call it the theological understanding of ministry because we're talking about theology here. So, what is the overall idea of ministry from which all of these different questions would arise? But also implicit in the theology of ministry are the following. In other words, how people understand the church. If we talk about the ministry of the church, how do we understand the church? Why is the church needing to undertake ministry? The other issue here is, if we are speaking about church ministry, how does this church look at the relationship between itself and Jesus Christ? Is there a kind of what do you call this? Is a kind of a similarity or the same kind of mission? Are they talking about the identical mission? The mission of Jesus Christ is the mission of the church in such a way that when we speak about church ministry, we're talking about actually it's the ministry that Jesus Christ would do if he were in our place at this time. Okay, so a kind of relationship. But at the same time, whatever we do, especially if we do kind of ministry towards those who do not believe in God, will tell us what we believe God is, especially how we believe Christ is revealing to us who God is. Okay. And fourthly, eventually when we start talking about God and we undertake a kind of a ministry in the name of God, we have an implicit idea of how do we look at humanity? What is humanity for all of us? How do we understand it? Why do I have to go advocate for justice and peace when maybe most of these people are Muslims or belonging to other religions? What is it, understanding of basic humanity, that propels me to undertake this kind of ministry? So, so we are actually talking about ecclesiology, about Christology, Trinity, and anthropology. Okay, I understand that half of the class have not taken up ecclesiology or nor Trinity nor Christology. The first year have only taken fundamental systematic theology and maybe fundamental moral theology, but they have not really taken ecclesiology, Christology, Trinity, which I would think would be prerequisites to the course itself on ministry. The problem is, of course, given the situation that we are in, the pandemic, we needed to make sure that that uh, we minimize the number of courses in such a way that we will not exceed the time slot or the schedule that we would have. And then there are certain subjects for the first year that cannot be taken this year because it demands face-to-face. For example, pastoral theology and other courses, they need face-to-face, especially methods of research, for example. Normally that's taken in the first year, second semester, but it cannot be done because you don't have access to the library. Okay, so in its place, of course, we have asked the first year to take this course on the ministry. But that's why I'm taking time to elaborate on this, because for those who are in second year already, they have an idea of who Christ is, who God is. Well, if we are talking about Trinity this time also in the second semester, at least simultaneously you are discussing Trinity, but especially about ecclesiology. You have taken ecclesiology in the past, so or the past semester. So the second year would be in a better position to understand the better or the wider perspective of the course of ministry. But these are all the prerequisites for the theology of ministry: a good understanding of the church, ecclesiology; a good understanding of who Christ is, Christology; a good understanding of who God is, for us Christians, God as one and three; and a good understanding of what it means to be human. And we probably have in our college courses, as well as in philosophy, we probably had taken up something about anthropology or something about the philosophy of man. But in other words, humanity, basic humanity. But also we're here talking about sociology, anthropology, sociology would be the social sciences that would help us in appreciating what it means to be human. Okay, so I will try to explain. Those of you in first year who may have difficulty with these prerequisites, who may not have had the chance to take ecclesiology, Christology, and Trinity. If you do have some questions, please ask them so that we can clarify, because most probably they come from the fact that you have not taken these courses before taking up the theology of ministry. So if the theology of ministry presupposes all this, we need to locate it in its own ecclesiological context. In other words, we have to ask ourselves, where is it, where does ministry fit in the whole idea of the church? Ministry, of course, is what we call a service. In other words, it is an extension of what the church is. It is an activity that is engaged upon by the church itself, but there's a wider context to what we do. The church is not just doing ministry, doing other things. Okay, but also located in terms of the centrality of Christ. How is ministry affected by a view of Christ as the center of our, not only of our church, but of our life? And then the same way also located in the context of our understanding of who God is, especially in the Christian concept of God is as Trinity, God one and three. And of course, the anthropological, sociological context. And that is the reason why we have to put ourselves in the context. We have to know the situation of the church within the church, but also the situation outside of the church within society. Okay, this is the reason why we are taking time here in this chapter, in the second full class of our course, to talk about this important context. Because if we don't know the context of our ministry, then we could be talking about ministry maybe from a heavenly perspective, but people may not even know what heaven is about. Okay, so we need to bring it down to their level. Okay, if we are clear on these contexts, ecclesiological, Christological, Trinitarian, and anthropological, sociological, then I think we will be able to understand the different issues and concerns in regard to ministry. We always bring up this matter. For example, on the role of the laity. People say, oh, the laity should be given more responsibility. If you ask yourself, what lies behind that assertion, that statement? What lies behind that statement is an understanding of the church that may not be everybody's understanding of the church. Basically, understanding of the church that the laity, since they are members of the Christian community by reason of baptism, has the responsibility to do ministry. So they are not just talking about something that is given to them by the priest or by the bishop. No, it's something that is by them, by their baptism is their right. So there is a theological understanding of the church there. Before, the understanding of the church is no, ordained ministers are the leaders in the church, and they have the ones who have the principal responsibility for doing ministry. So if I'm going to ask lay people to help me in my ministry, they are helping me do my work. They are not necessarily doing their work as baptized Christians on behalf of their fellow Christians or on behalf of other people. It is their own, they are simply doing it because the priest has asked them. Now, that is already changed. That kind of a perspective on church has changed already. Since the Second Vatican Council, it has already been superseded, so to speak. And the same thing when we talk about the role of women. Why do women insist on, well, at least having the right to be ordained also? What lies behind it, of course, is the idea that, since there are very few priests and priests are male, why not ask the women who can also do the same kind of work perhaps that the priest would be able to do? And that therefore we would have more priests. We would have more people doing ministry for the church. So again, the whole understanding of the role of women in terms of ministry, behind it lies an understanding of the church. That the church consists of men and women, and men and women should be able to do the kind of ministry. But in the past, we used to say that no, women do not do ministry, even if they are the ones who are cleaning the church or preparing or washing the vestments and the altar cloths in the parishes. That's not really what we would call ministry. What is it? How do we call it now? Now, of course, we think of it in a different way. And a third issue, referring to the ministry, of course, is whether we can still speak about ordained or not ordained ministry. Is that a good distinction about ordination and not ordination as the basis for whether a person is able to do ministry or not? If you are not ordained, then you are not what we would call the official ministers. But if you are not ordained and you are always being asked to do reading in the church or do maybe ushering or do even a collecta, you go around or you are in the financial board of the diocese, that may not be ordained, but it is also ministry. So the ordination doesn't become the category that distinguishes between one ministry, the ministry of the ordained, or the ministry of the laity. And the same thing in regard to the power of ordination. What enables? What is it that enables a person, mostly a male Christian, what is it that enables him to do ministry? Is it the power of ordination? Therefore, all ministers have to be ordained? Or is it the power of the mission that was entrusted by Jesus Christ to all his followers, to all his disciples? So you have behind this idea about the insistence on ordination as different from mission is the understanding of what it means to be church and what is the responsibility of the members of the church towards what they have inherited from Christ, which is the mission of Christ. Okay. But even when you talk about married and celibate clergy, ultimately, you will have to resolve this issue not by simply saying, okay, since the married people can also perform can also administer the sacraments, why not make them, accept them as married clergy? And we have married clergy in other denominations, Christian denominations. Why don't we allow it in the Catholic Church? Ultimately, again, as I said, we need to locate it in its own proper place in terms of the theology of the church and the theology of ministry and how they are related. Of course, you go back also in terms of the theology of who Christ is and who God is, and of course, who we are as human beings. So to be able to respond effectively to to these issues and the concerns, we need to make sure that we have the proper ecclesiological, Christological, Trinitarian, or sociological framework. Okay, so my idea here is that we need to be aware that we are not just talking about something. Sometimes when we argue, we argue from a different from many different what do you call this presuppositions. For example, in terms of the lack of vocations to the ministry, lack of seminarians, or lack of even religious sisters. Uh, Sometimes people just say, "Well, okay, it's probably because of the discrimination that the whole idea that you need to be celibate to become a priest, or you need to be a male to become a priest." Okay, but there is actually a much bigger perspective that has to be taken into consideration, and that bigger perspective is our understanding of who the church is, what the church is, and what is it that we can share. What are the responsibilities that we can share with one another? That's important to bear in mind. So therefore, we just do not say, okay, because we don't have enough priests or enough seminarians, then we should go back to the old ways, which was to have minor seminaries. And you have training of, let's say, candidates for the religious life in high school or something like that. That's not the solution. And the solution, it has to do with the reframing our own idea of who the church is, and what is it in relation to the mission of the church. So, and this is what Murray, one article that I have recommended to you is the article by Murray. I understand that what he has to say is from the perspective of what he calls the global north. In other words, Europe and North America, basically Western perspective. But he is saying that according to this way of thinking, the perspective that we have been trying to put here, issues pertaining to ministry are not simply reduced to matters concerning the church's internal organizations. In other words, the church as, the internal, the internal part of the church, the structures of authority, just the church in itself. They need to relate directly to the sacramentality and sign value of what the church is before God and before the world and for the world. In other words, the church has a mission not just to itself, but to the world. And the world is not Christian sometimes. Majority of the world is not Christian. But that is still part of the mission of the church. And directly, therefore, to the church's witness and mission. So beyond the church, ministry has to be seen in the context of not just within the church, but also beyond the church. It is in light of this that Congar was quoted as saying that after the Second Vatican Council, it is no longer the layman that stands in need of definition, but the priest. You will remember that before the Second Vatican Council, it was very clear that priest is the minister, because the idea there was that ordained ministry is only for the ordained. All the others are only sharers in the ministry of the ordained. After the council, we have what we call democratization. People now have taken on the idea of ministry, not just the ordained, but also even the lay people. In which case, because now the council has asserted that the lay people also partake in this mission, in this ministry that Christ has bequeathed to us. Therefore, the question would be, what is now the role of the priest? If everybody is a minister, what is now the role of the priest? And that is why he says we need to redefine the role of the priest. And Congar is right. I think we have to redefine. But it means simply we have to redefine it because we have redefined the church. The church, the very essence and the nature of the church has been redefined as not simply consisting of the ordained, simply, and the rest are people who the priest minister to, but it is now the whole community as the people of God. And where does the priest fit into this whole what do you call this perspective? All right, let's talk about some issues and concerns and problems within the church. What are those things that we find in the church, which we will need to address when we do ministry? Fortunately, there are some positive experiences. This is what I would call an intra within the church. There's an increase in growth of church communities, and we have already seen this in our sweeping overview of the different continents. There's also the democratization, in other words, the sense that we belong to the church. We are not just, the unimportant 98% of the church, the laity, but the church now is our church, not just the priest's church or the hierarchy's church or the bishop's church. With it has come a sense of belonging to a religious community, a community of faith, basically, a sense of belonging. And you can see this. This is part of our experiences nowadays. We sense a kind of a religiosity. You go around us, you go around wherever, you go to the malls, you go to the streets, you can sense something about something spiritual, even in the whole reaction to the pandemic. More than likely, many people go back to something deep down spiritual or religious. And then, of course, the awareness and the expansion of the roles of lay people, not just as it used to say, just in the matter of finances or the matter of constructing a church. Do you get the lay people? But even in the actual running of the church, the conducting the church, the lay people can be very much involved. Not just the what we would call the Eucharistic ministry, in referring to the different sacraments, but also other ways by which we can have the lay people do some kind of ministry. Someone doesn't have his muted. Your mute someone. We're hearing some noise.
Juan Carlos.
T. Okay, JC. All right. So some positive experiences. Some positive experience in regard to outside the church towards the world. It is undoubted that the church, has a great influence in world affairs. It used to be, of course, in the past. Well, it used to be that whatever the church says, the church is carried out. Nowadays, of course, when the church is not the majority, the church still continues to exercise a kind of an influence. And I give example of this is the encyclical of the Pope Francis, about Laudato Si, about the care for our common home or ecology. Okay, you can see that this is something that is appreciated not only by the Catholics, by the Christians, but especially by people outside of the church who are very serious about ecological matters. So we can see this as something that is very, very positive. But also, whether we realize it or not, the church has a vast network, very, very vast. And the good thing about this network is that it comes from the very top up to the very bottom. That's how extensive the network is of the church. You have the Pope, the bishops, the cardinals, people who are what we would call world leaders, and then the dioceses, you have the bishops, etc. But then from the bishops, you go to the parish priest, and the parish priest, you go down to the basic lay people, lay communities in the barangays, in the different chapels. That is the network of the church. Not only diocesans, but also congregations, religious congregations. You have, and then there are so many volunteers, lay people volunteer, missionaries, so missions and movements, all kinds. El Shaddai, all over the world. Even all the Filipinos who are engaged in a lot of pastoral ministry everywhere. OFWs, they are doing a lot of pastoral ministry. That is also part of the network of the church. I don't know whether you realize this, but the UN, when the UN comes up with some programs, for example, like the Millennium Development Goals, I don't know if you're aware of it, the Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000, the UN had come up with some 10 Millennium Development Goals. For example, eradication of poverty or the decrease in the what do you call this maternal what do you call this mortality. Many women who are bearing who are what do you call this uh, um, giving birth to children for the first time. Many of them in especially in Africa and in very poor areas in China and even in India are they usually die. So that is what we call maternal mortality. Those Millennium Development Goals that the UN had enacted they actually originated from the religious group, and they have, because the religious group have what do we call this? They have a voice in the UN. In the UN, there's a group of the religious who have a kind of a contact with the UN. They were the ones who suggested these Millennium Development Goals. And in carrying out the Millennium Developments of the UN, they also made use of the church structure, the church network. That is what they had done. And they do a great deal of service and work everywhere. The UN has acknowledged that the church has a marvelous system or network of charitable works or any services that we can do in terms of education, in terms of hospitalization, taking care of the people who are infected with HIV, and of course now it's or those who were affected by, let's say, the financial disaster that happened in the year 2008 or 2009. Many religious groups had assisted lay people into restructuring, for example, their debts with the banks. Those are the things that many of the church personnel have been able to do on behalf of the general population in our society. So we can never appreciate enough the network that we have in the church. But also, the church has used its voice to speak for humanity, especially in matters of peace, justice, and human development. I showed you a picture at the beginning of this chapter, Pope Francis meeting with the religious leaders. And what are they concerned about? They are concerned not only with religious matters, but they are concerned about the world. So Pope Francis is leading all these world leaders to come together and speak up, especially in regard to very important issues affecting all of us as human beings or as inhabitants of this world. And I think that is something that we can credit the church for doing. In fact, that is already a kind of a ministry. Okay, that also comes from our own understanding that the church is not only for itself but also for others. So we have to be concerned about the welfare of other people, whether they belong to the church or not. It doesn't matter. But at the same time, the church is facing some crises, and your picture tells you that there is a kind of a crack somewhere. Decreasing church attendance, religious vocation, priestly vocations. Okay, people will say, "Oh, they no longer want to become priests." I think the Philippines is an exception because there are many. We still have many seminarians, but in other places like the north, oh, they have problems. Oh, vocations to the religious life, problems also. Sometimes we say there's a problem of the decreasing church attendance. That is not the problem here in the Philippines. Of course, only 25% of the general population go to church on a Sunday. The 75% of the Christian population do not go to church on Sundays. Because if they were to go to church, we will have to build more churches. We'll have to build more churches, or we will have mass from 5 o'clock in the morning up to about midnight on Sundays, if we are going to do that. So there is reason for it. Also, the loss of faith. And many people, perhaps if we talk about internal problems in the church. You talk about people who are Christians who are becoming Muslims or becoming atheists. That is that's just still, but there is some recent things, and we will discuss it a bit later. Weakening of family. Before, our family used to be big in terms of 7, 8, 9, 8, 10 children. Now that we're talking about few, 1 or 2 children only, and then the bond there is close, of course, but it can also easily just break up just as quickly because there are only few people who would feel like they belong to one family, or they need to invest in keeping the family intact. And of course, the whole scandal of the clerical abuse. The clerical abuse has been the, what do you call this, the scourge that we in the church had to face, because this is really a terrible thing. Not only was it, from the moral perspective, not only was it a scandal and a sin, but also it affected the church a great deal, especially in those areas where these things were happening, or at least there was a great publicity about this in the, what do you call this, in the what were first world countries, in Europe, in America, and in some areas, maybe in some Catholic countries like the Philippines and in South America, maybe there are some instances of this. But this is, I mean, we cannot underscore the we cannot underscore enough the idea or the effect that this has made on us church. Whether we like it, at the very least, it has made us lose credibility before people, and of course, scandalized so many people that they decided to leave the church. Now, we speak about institutional crisis. Is there an institutional crisis in the church? Uh, this is probably not so much felt in countries like the Philippines, because the church as an institution is still there. Although we can point to certain areas. For example, I will be very honest with you. I don't know what is your political, what do you call this, inclination, but my political inclination is that I think something has to be done by the church in regard to things that are happening in the government and in our country. Well, of course, we are doing that. For example, the what do you call this, anti-terrorism bill, or it has become now a kind of a law that's being questioned before the Supreme Court. And of course, many church people are undertaking that. But I think on very serious matters in regard to even government policies, the church is still divided. And the reason we're divided is because our bishops are divided and our clergy are divided. In other words, we do not have a single voice that is able to stand before the instances of, let's say, extrajudicial killing, or instances of what do you call this, manipulation of by politicians, let's say, of the Constitution, or even the whole idea of corruption. You know, all corruption. We're not able to do that because the church doesn't speak with one voice. And that is a very, very serious thing for us here in the church. During the Marcos years, for example, especially during the time of EDSA, we know exactly what the church thought about Marcos and the dictatorship and Marcelo, and and the church spoke out very clearly. This is the message of the church in regard. And in no small way, the church was able to change the society in a way because of their being united. That's not the case now in the church in the Philippines. Even when we talk about the celebration for the 500th anniversary of Christianization in the Philippines, we still have divided mind. People are not speaking with one voice in regard to what we as a church would like to celebrate. I heard the latest I've heard is that every diocese now will be celebrating its own. Cebu will celebrate its own in its own way, and Manila will celebrate it its own way. What kind of celebration is that? A national celebration that is watak-watak. Okay. All right. Some people have said also that the sectors or some sectors have said that the Second Vatican Council reforms have been stalled, have not been carried out. And some even complained about the direction of the Second Vatican Council, the reforms of the Second Vatican Council. There are still people who are questioning some of the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. That's a crisis for us because we are, again, not able to understand as a whole, as a body, as an organization, what the importance of a council such as the Second Vatican Council in the pronouncements of the teachings of the Second Vatican Council, which are so decisive and so very important in going forward. Also, there are some structural defects. Maybe, for example, the choice of bishops. Formerly, the choice of bishops was done by lay people. Now, the choice of bishops, of course, is done by the people who are the leaders. Sometimes they consult certain people, lay people, but most of the time they only consult bishops and other people. So maybe that is a structural defect. Something has to be done about it.